Brett Haley, and Bleecker Street asked me to talk to Nikole Beckwith, who I'm a big fan of, especially after seeing her lovely film Together. And they asked me to talk to you, and I it's great to meet you virtually and talk about this incredibly inspiring and funny and heartfelt and moving film. I loved it.
Oh, thank you so much. Wait, you have to tell the folks at home the movie that you made with Bleecker.
Oh, that's right. I made a movie in 2015 called I'll See You in My Dreams, and Bleecker Street was my first experience with like getting my movie picked up and out to the world, and they did a wonderful job with it. And so I'm always happy to help Bleecker Street out. And it was even easier when I got to see this movie, and I just loved every minute of it. I really did.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah. So speaking of your great movie, why don't you tell me, because I'll tell you what struck me about it, just like the thing about it that really I found to be the most interesting sort of if you will, was this unique relationship. It is a film for me that is really about this very singular, unique relationship, something you probably haven't seen before. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about, was that what drew you to this story? Like, was that idea, the kind of germ of the idea, was the unique relationship at the center of this film? And then you could kind of tell people what the film is about in that way.
Yeah. So the film is about a man in his 40s who's single, who wants to become a father and hires a gestational surrogate. So it's not her egg. And the movie is from their first meeting in the interview until the baby's first breath. And I knew I wanted to tell a surrogacy story like that, just because I was very curious what that would be like to do something so intimate with a stranger. So when I write things, I really write, I almost feel like an audience member. Like, I know that some writers are like a puppeteer, like they're like the god of the universe making things happen. I feel like I'm a quiet observer, and I'm like, I'll just be writing and I'm like, oh wow, really? Like, I had no idea. So I'm also on the edge of my seat. But I was just curious what that would be like between strangers. And then as the story was evolving and like revealing itself to me, I did realize that how hungry I was for a non-romantic relationship to be represented with just as much like weight and gravity, just in general, like in any media. And I thought it was also important, they're two straight people and they're a man and a woman, and like, yeah, they can be friends, and like, there's a large age difference between them, which I think we're also like very used to seeing that romanticized between an older man and a younger woman. Like, there is like some devastating quote where it's like Maggie Gyllenhaal at like 37 was too old to play opposite like a 57-year-old leading man,
Yeah.
which is just like gutting. And so it's not that I don't, again, like, I think, sure, that dynamic has lots to offer each other, but it doesn't have to be sexualized and dumb.
No. And it was very refreshing in this film to see a platonic love story in many ways, a story that was, I think, like at its heart, there was so much. It's like watching a romantic comedy, but it's like not romantic, but you feel those things. I mean, that was one of the things that I really responded to, was just how much the movie made me feel. It's so beautifully observed and so kind of lovingly crafted because it really is this two-hander, and we can't talk about this movie without talking about the cast, especially. I mean, you have a wonderful cast.
Oh my gosh.
I feel like you and I watch the same television, is my feeling. You've got just amazing people in here like Tig Notaro, Nora Dunn, and Anna Konkol, and Joe Firestone. These are all just like wonderful, wonderful people, because it's a wonderful supporting cast. But this really is a two-hander. It's really a spotlight on Ed Helms and Patty Harrison. And I think we all knew Ed Helms, and you get to see him in this different light. You get to see him kind of do his Ed Helms thing, and then he really, I loved what you guys did with his performance and how he opens up and how his character goes from on this journey. And but I tell you, Patty Harrison just blew me away in this film. I've been a fan of her since I first saw her in Shrill and thought she was so funny, and her comedic timing was so spot on. And I was like, that actor has such a presence. And I talk about how you came to casting Patty and Ed in this movie and just what it was like to work with them, because they're so wonderful. Their chemistry and their relationship, just, it's the movie and it's wonderful.
Thank you. Yes, I'm it's an embarrassment of riches. I'm very spoiled cast-wise. Obviously I was like a huge fan of Ed's, still am. And we went to him first. So it was just kind of like, you just shoot for the stars or whatever, like literally, figuratively. And so then when I got this phone call that was like, oh, Ed likes the script and wants to meet, I was like, oh, he does. Like, I didn't really think that he was gonna bite back. And so I was like, oh, So we went and had coffee and just immediately clicked. And he is so present and generous and just so smart and feeling, and I think like also like just like in a reductive way, like when I watched The Office, um, and I think this is true of all of Ed's parts. It's like, yes, Andy Bernard is crazy and he's like really, he's punching walls. He's like yodeling on it with his like banjo and stuff, like all these very overtly comedic things. But when I'm watching it, I'm just so keyed into like, ooh, this is a man who doesn't have the approval from his father that he wanted. He's like struggling to find his place in the world. He felt like he had so much potential, and now all of a sudden in his 30s, and you can't live off potential in your 30s, and like just holding on to the Cornell like school crest as like evidence, and all of these very vulnerable, super emotional motivators and like genesis of all of his actions. And so the idea in bringing this part to Ed was like, what if we took all of that stuff that's like in the back seat, like driving these bigger overtly like hilarious performances, and we just like swapped it out and like put the vulnerable like core stuff in the front seat, and see what happens. And so like that's what happened. And when we sat and talked and were meeting about the script, it was just like that was what we were really like keying into. He's so great, and a dad, he was a newer father when we first met, and so that was all very fresh for him, all of the parent stuff and that fatherhood desire, which it bums me out that there's no real ubiquitous kind of like representation of men becoming fathers, like in a positive way. I feel like more often than not we're seeing them like dragged into fatherhood unexpectedly, or like by a demanding wife or something. And so I thought it was very important to tell like a father story, like a man wants to be a father. And he also really clicked with that. And it's kind of like when you read it and you take that part of the story, and it's like almost then makes you realize how little of that you've seen, where you're like, oh right. And so I was just thrilled when he I think like 20 minutes into our coffee we were like, well, we're gonna do this together.
We're doing this. That's a good feeling when you like get your dream person, the person that you wrote it for in your brain, which I'm sure Ed was probably in your brain when you were writing.
I mean, I think it's so amazing that everyone's like, oh well, you wrote it for Ed, and I think that's just a testament to like his performance and our collaboration, because I think that's just and Patty too. People are like, so you wrote this for Ed and Patty, and it's just like, no, they're just like that brilliant that like you're watching them and you're like, oh, there's no other people that could possibly have done this. This is for them. And I think that is just like, it's a testament to their chemistry and to our collaboration, to their talents and gifts. And so like I'm just very grateful for that.
I think I have similar things where I've worked with actors who are I worked with Nick Offerman, who's famous for being Ron Swanson, and that's what people want Nick as and know Nick as, and little do they know Nick has contains multitudes, as does an Ed Helms or a Steve Carell or all these people who make themselves famous on one role. And I love it that you came along and he fit into this, I think, in his Ed Helms way. But then I think also you see this just wonderful, warm side, and obviously the chemistry. So we know you went to Ed first. So talk about how you came to think of Patty for this role, and the role of Anna. And she's really remarkable in this film.
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of like scouring the world for my Anna, the whole entire world. But you know, I think it was like interesting to us to think about. It's not like it's her first role or whatever, but it's her first like leading driving film role, and so like it was exciting too to think about bringing someone up in that way, which is made possible by having someone like Ed in your film. It's such a nice balance, and so like Ed coming on opened up a lot of opportunity for us to be like, great, let's take some like wild swings or whatever. And so I came across Patty's Tonight Show appearance that I think like is what brought her to like most people's like general consciousness, I guess. I didn't see it like as it was like at the time that it aired, but I saw it on the internet. I don't know if you've heard of the
I've heard
internet.
of it. I'm familiar with it these days.
It's cool. The
Yeah.
internet's cool.
It can be. It can be.
It can be. It's also a hellscape.
Yes.
So I saw that appearance and it just kind of like clicked for me, where I was like, oh look, there's Anna. And so then I was just kind of like looking for anything I could watch, like Sarah and High Maintenance. I think it was like right before Shrill came out, and so like pretty swiftly like Shrill was delivered like into the world and I could see her there. And A Simple Favor, she has a very funny scene in A Simple Favor. And just I also like to listen to interviews and like watch interviews, watch someone be themselves, because I think that's equally as important, if not like maybe more important, than watching performances made with somebody else in a different time and space. So I just want to see like what's kicking around in there, like who's in there, what do we have to work with. And so I just fell in love with Patty, and I was like, I know that this is Anna. It just like felt that click, and so we sent her the script and she read it and she liked it, and then like before I knew it, I was having coffee with Patty, which was really exciting. And again, just really connected, really easy. We were just very much on the same page and the same wavelength, and we're responding to the same things in the script, you know, and in the story. Like she was very relieved that like as she was reading it, she kind of figured either they're going to get together or it's going to be revealed that it's like a huge hoax and she was like grifting him and she was never pregnant, which are like, those are the kind of like the two things that you might like expect, and neither of those things happened, so she was pleasantly surprised. And I just think that Patty is so, I mean, I don't think that she's incredibly thoughtful. She's one of the most thoughtful people I've ever met. And that is no small part of why her performance is so thoughtful and so beautiful and connected and like just dialed in. And she has this very amazing energy. Like there's something about Patty, and this is in her comedy as well. It's like you lean in, you want to be around her, you want more Patty, but then she also has this kind of like salty vibe that's like, but you know, stay over there for now. And so it's that kind of push pull that's like the ultimate thing, right? It's like that's what you want. And she just has that very naturally and knows, you know, knows how to throw it into the sun or whatever. And yeah, and it was just great. So then I had this like very funny like weird like blind date, you know, with like Patty and Ed, where it's like I'm setting them up for a date, but then I stay and like watch them like talk and see if they get along, which is like very funny. And so we had like a lovely coffee or lunch or whatever it was, and then I forget if Patty was shooting something or something, but she had to like run, and then Ed and I like walked a block or whatever, sidebarring, and he was just like, yeah, she's amazing. And I was like, great, yeah, right, she's amazing. And so then we went all in.
Yeah, and it's I think it's very interesting what you were saying about getting, you obviously watch actors' performances, but you also watch their interviews or like check out their Instagram. Similar, at least from what I can tell from your movies, that you really want kind of like that soul of the person to be in, a part of the character. And you want to like connect those two things. I remember Nick told me one time we were doing a shot of him and he was just walking down the street and he was like, oh my God, like no one's ever shot me just like walking down the street. I'm just like the normal guy in this movie. And I think, a lot of actors, they get just like filmmakers. And it's kind of what I want to talk to you about next, because I think we talk about, oh, you're that actor that does this. Like, oh, you're Patty Harrison. You're the comedian. You're that funny best friend character. It's like,
Mhm.
no, I can also be this other thing. And Ed Helms, you're from The Office. You're, no, I can also do this other thing. We love to put artists into boxes, especially actors, and we
Mhm.
love to put directors into boxes. I remember when I made I'll See You in My Dreams, I was 30 years old. It happened to be about people in their 70s. And everyone
Mhm.
was just like, so you make movies about people in their 70s? And I was like, well, I made one. I made one.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I made another one with Sam Elliott. And everyone was like, oh, you really are that guy. And I was like, no, I just
Yeah.
fell in love with Sam Elliott. Like, can you
Of
blame me?
course. Yeah.
Um, and I think it's like you were coming off of your last film, Stockholm, Pennsylvania, which is about a much darker story about, a person coming home after having this horrible traumatic experience and having difficulty adjusting to their regular life, as if that's just
Yeah.
supposed to be some natural thing. So I'm sure people were like, oh my God, you want to make something that's like kind and sweet and warm-hearted and funny, and you're like, yeah, I do. Like, can you talk about like, I have definitely felt that, and I'm sure you're getting that or got that when you were at Sundance and stuff. Like, oh, you made such a dark movie, and now you've made such a not dark movie, a kind of life
Mhm.
affirming movie. But I love that, like, yeah, we as filmmakers are allowed to tell different types of stories.
Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely a journey. I mean, so I wrote the script on a fellowship with San Francisco Film Society, and they had like reached out to me after I was at Sundance with Stockholm, Pennsylvania. Another cast that's just a true embarrassment of riches.
Yeah.
The San Francisco Film Society reached out and they're like, "Oh, we have this like female filmmaker genre fellowship. If you want to like submit a pitch and then apply and do." And they thought obviously it was like sci-fi horror comedy. So obviously they thought I was going for horror because Stockholm, Pennsylvania is kind of like a psychological, yeah. Anyway, and so I was like, well, I think I'm gonna go for the comedy. I'm gonna submit for comedy. And they were like, oh, really? What? Um, and I was like, yeah, that's just like what I'm feeling right now. That's kind of like what I'm kicking around. I feel like you know, I'm not anticipating what it is I'll make next exactly, but like what genre it'll fit into. But it's kind of like you need some inhales and some exhales. Um, you gotta kind of shake it off. Anyway, and so then I wrote the script. Oh, so then I got the fellowship. They were like, "Oh, what? You actually that does sound funny and not scary." So
Yeah.
here, and so I wrote the film on that fellowship. Largely spending a lot of time in San Francisco, also. So I set the film there. And then when I was kind of sending it around, um, there were people that were like, are you sure this is like the move? You kind of have to like brand yourself or whatever. And I was like, well, I don't know if that's true actually. I think especially for women, it's like even more restrictive. The anticipation of like wanting to put someone in a box and be like, this is the type of movie they make, this is their voice. I think there's something in like anticipation that makes people feel comfortable or whatever. And familiar and like they know things um but yeah, I don't know, it came up. I mean, but there's also, so they are like wildly different in tone, but then as I'm like talking about the film a lot, I'm realizing there are a lot of similarities actually, like they're two-handers more or less.
Yeah.
Uh they both open with like a scene where someone is like coming in and they're like talking and it feels like strangers talking. In Stockholm, they're actually also biologically biologically related, but they still are functioning as strangers. And it's that's the inciting incident, happens on page 1. And then, the story continues largely based on internal shifts and a development or a destruction of a relationship, and then ends on a question. And so I was like, oh, I guess I do like have a voice that like transcends whatever the genres that it's functioning within. But it was very cool. It was very cool of Ed, especially like when I was talking to him. I was like, so have you seen Stockholm, Pennsylvania? And he's like, yeah, it's really different. And I really appreciated in him the understanding that, there's like elasticity there in your voice and your ability to communicate things and make a world. And that he wasn't thinking like, well, I don't know if she could. I mean, that other movie is kind of dark. He just had faith. He was like, oh, yes, if you make one smart movie, you can make another smart movie, and it doesn't matter what the vibe is.
Yeah, no, and I think both of your films have an incredibly human, grounded element. Like there is connective cinematic tissue, if you will, between them. But there's also, I think, it's just very funny how people respond, wait, oh, you did something so different. It's like, well, like you're saying, yes and no. I think that this has your signature on it as a filmmaker, as a writer and director, and it has different connective things, but it also shows that I think most of the time, if we're allowed to go make the films we don't want to make the same film more than once. I don't think most filmmakers, at least I don't, I can only speak for myself, but I certainly want to make all kinds of movies. I know my limitations, or at least I think I do. I'm like, probably not gonna go make that type of movie, but I like all kinds of movies, so I want to make all kinds. So when did you shoot the movie?
So we were lucky because we shot in the bulk of the movie in 17 days, and
wow,
we shot in September 9th, 2019 was our first shoot day, and then we wrapped October 4th or something, and we shot 17 days in LA, and that's where the bulk of the movie is. All of our interiors and all but a few of our exteriors, and then we flew to San Francisco with like a skeleton crew and shot exteriors in SF for a day and a half. And so I was in the edit when lockdown started. Like I was going to the edit every day, and then it's like hand sanitizers popping up, and then like lots of signs about like wash your hands are popping up, and then like everyone is kind of like moving strangely down the halls of this building, and I was like, I'm gonna work from home. Like I was like, I don't want to keep going here. So in February, like mid-February, I started working from home, editing from home with Annette Davey, my brilliant editor. And then lockdown was like, they were like, it's coming. And so then in March, we all locked down. And by that point, we had quite a bit done, thank God. So it wasn't super disruptive, or like as disruptive as it could have been to the process. Like Annette and I had spent quite a while shoulder to shoulder already. So it's like we had our communication established, and like she had a really strong understanding of like what I responded to and didn't respond to, which is something that you really have to generate between the editor and the director, like in the room, because she's like picking up on my body language, the way like interrupting, what it means if I'm interrupting, or like if I'm anxious when I'm watching something, or excited or whatever. And then she is doing her like brilliant editor magic of like cataloging all of those like human cues and being like, yeah, this is what Nikole, this is, and so then she got really good as if like I got a note or a suggestion or a thought that I like immediately was like, I don't know. She'd be like, let me do it the way that you'll like it. And I'd be like, okay. And then she showed to me, I'd be like, oh, you're right. That is exactly the way that I like it. And so I feel very grateful that we were able to develop that dynamic and understanding between us before being kind of siloed in our separate apartments. And then I did sound and color during lockdown. So those were the only times I actually left my apartment, all through lockdown. I have Lyme disease, or had Lyme disease. I have chronic Lyme disease. And so it's like nobody could tell us anything about like what was going on, that like falls into like, it can fall into like an autoimmune
Yeah.
category because it's just this like chronic weird thing. And so it's just like, I don't know, nobody's
Yeah,
saying
you don't want to
anything
take,
about
yeah, you don't
anything.
want to take that risk. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
big. I was gonna say that I went through, I finished a movie during lockdown, know like what that, I fortunately got to do everything from home, even color and sound, which was a totally
Yes, we
weird and
did that.
unique
Yeah.
experience. But it's going in, there's something really like you're talking to about working with an editor, working with a colorist, working with a sound editor. There's something about being in the room with these people. So that makes a huge difference. So it's a
Mhm.
testament to everybody's work that the movie, you guys brought it home under these very difficult circumstances.
Yeah, it was very cool. Yeah, sound we did like Zoom style or some other like crazy platform until it got to the point where, and they sent me like nice headphones so I wasn't like
Yeah,
trying to do
yeah.
it on my, and then we got to the point where it was like, okay, so maybe I can't listen to it on headphones anymore because I'm like, what's that? And they're like, we're not hearing that. We don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so I'll come in. So I came in a couple of times, like twice, I think. I'm not sure. Quadruple masked, shield, tested, obviously, and all of us just being like, "Whoa." And it was like when it's over, you want to high five or hug or something, but you
I
can't. It's
know.
just like,
Yeah.
okay, so I'm just gonna wave to you from like a weird distance. Cool working on a whole movie together. Bye. Um, and then for color, I was never in the same room with the colorist, but I was in the shoulder to shoulder with the DP, Frank Barrera. So that was a relief because without him, I think color is always so not daunting, but it's crazy because color is so subjective.
It
So
is.
it's
And
such
and
a
your
crazy
eyes
experience.
can get like tired, and you come back the next day and you're like, wait, what were we doing on, what were we thinking on this scene or whatever. It does take
Yeah.
time, and it takes like, you got to go out, as my colorist says, like, we got to go rest our eyes, like go get some sunlight, like get a break
Yeah.
from it for a little bit.
And I think also like some people, so there's like a spectrum of colors you see, right? And so it's like there's color blindness. So it's like you're seeing this very limited spectrum. And then there's like the average spectrum. And then there's like a little extra tip too, where it's like sometimes you see that. And I'm in the extra zone. And so it's
No.
like also it means I'm seeing like hues and color. So like my brain sometimes will just be like frying out because I'm like seeing all of these things and trying to, so that's why it's like was so helpful to have Frank the DP because I'm like, you know what I'm saying, like what I'm
You
trying to
have
say.
you have speaking of colors, you have a very big scene in this movie about colors. That's one of my favorite scenes in the movie. I don't know
Good.
spoilers,
No
but
spoilers, yeah.
there is a
Uh,
great scene for all of you watching out there to know. There is a great scene about color in this film.
Loosely inspired by my insane relationship to color.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So a little bit of you in the character of Matt, maybe in that scene.
Yes, definitely. I give a little bit of myself to everybody in there,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
as a writer
And
is wont to do.
yes, I know. And I wanted to also talk about the feeling that I had watching this film was very much, it's funny how you can hit on something kind of zeitgeisty, like without really knowing it. And I think people say this sort of thing all the time, like, oh, it's a great movie for right now. But I really think this applies. This film made me feel genuinely good. And I don't mean in, when people say feel good, there can be kind of like a weird thing around that for some reason. But I'm like, when it's earned and it's genuine, which I think this film, that is what made me feel so good watching it. It was like being reminded of human connection, being reminded of
Hmm.
just that feeling you get, especially right now as we're more disconnected. It really just made my heart full in the most kind of earned and honest
Hmm.
way. So I wanted to
That's so
thank you for that.
nice.
I mean, it's true. I gave a very passionate speech to my wife about this movie, and she's going to watch it when it comes out. About, and I don't want to give
Wow,
away
you
anything,
you didn't
but
share the link, huh?
No, I didn't. I wanted to. She's got to buy this movie. It's worth the price. Okay.
Wow,
So
thank you.
whether it's if in theaters or on demand, she's gonna have to pay just like everybody else. And I'll get to watch it again, which is totally worth it. Without my initials on the forehead of Ed Helms and
Oh
Patty
yeah,
Harrison the whole time. So
that'll do
I'm
it. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that. But the without giving anything away, the thing, like, no spoilers, but I just want to just tell you as filmmaker to filmmaker how much I loved the end of your movie. The end of your
Mm.
movie, and I was just going on and on about it with my wife. I was just like, it's incredible. And I just want to kudos to you, like what you did with with writing, performance, where the camera was, what you did with the sound. It is so incredible how you stick the landing, and it's so moving and so beautifully done. So Nikole, I just really wanted to tell you how much I loved the end of this movie. It just knocked it out of the park.
Thank you. I'm gonna cry.
Well,
Thank
I mean,
you.
it's like when you land on something that it's just this little slice of simplicity, but it's perfection in its simplicity.
Mm.
And I was so moved by it. And I mean, the whole movie's lovely, but when you stick a landing like that, and without giving it away, what I love about it, and I've tried to do the same with my films, is what's the emotional moment you want to end on? It's not some plot thing. It's not some, oh, what's going to happen, da 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 da. It's like, what's that emotional moment that you picked to choose? And I think you chose the perfect moment. This movie, Together Together, comes out April 23rd in theaters, and people should go see it because it'll make them feel better about the world. It just will.
Oh, thank you. Yes, we need that right now. I did it for you.